Hello everyone, and I'm Casey Cormier, and I'm doing a presentation today on the history of architecture and how it's changed since the dawn of time to around the 1500s. The first form of architecture is known to be caves. Caves were used as the first houses, most likely because they were at a constant temperature of 60 degrees. Since the first prehistoric people most likely lived in these caves, this is where we get the term caveman from. It makes sense that the people would live in caves also because they were hunters and gatherers and they had to follow the animals' migration. It didn't make a lot of sense to build a house that would take several months to, in a couple weeks, you could be getting up and leaving as the animals migrated. Instead just to find a cave and live there for several months and then follow the animals' migration and then find a different cave there. It's also found that people would paint on the walls of the caves. Most likely this was due because in the winter they would have a lot of time that they couldn't be outside, so they would paint on the walls, and this is like the first link to art and architecture that we can see, and we'll see in the future that art and architecture are very closely linked together. The beginning of buildings, once the human beings began settling down to the business of agriculture instead of hunting and gathering, permanent settlements became a factor of life. The story of architecture can begin. That's the world's history. Once people would settle down and start their farms and they began seeing that they were going to be in that place for several years, it made sense to build homes nicer than the caves, and they were going to live in them. The development of tools at that time was also a very large factor in the progress of architecture. When tools would be improved or invented, it made construction much easier, and it also made it faster to build houses. The development of architecture. Without the development of civilization, people may not have gotten together to build bigger and better buildings. According to researcher Joshua Mark, as civilization advanced, so did the architecture, with the appearance of windows and doors braced and adorned by wooden frames. I believe that once civilization started to grow, the buildings, people wanted to work together, and architecture is such a team job that, you needed that civilization, you needed that team to be able to build temples and tombs and courts and theaters. Building materials at this time were also becoming much stronger and more durable. We see that instead of them using the clay and mud that was used before, they start using brick and stone, which is why we still have so many ruins of this time, unlike the earlier times. Greek architecture. According to researcher Mark Cartwright, Greek architecture provides some of the finest and most distinctive buildings in the entire ancient world. I think this is definitely true, and it's one of the reasons we still marvel at the Greek architecture, and we get so many of our examples of beautiful architecture from the Greeks. The Greeks started the movement towards buildings that weren't just buildings, but they also had a visual beauty to them. They appealed to the eye. They would adorn them with pictures and columns, and the Greeks are known for just really making the building stand out and be beautiful on its own. The Greeks also started the column designs of Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian, which would go on to play a large role in Roman architecture and is even still around to this day. Going on to Roman architecture, according to ancient history, the Roman architects continued to follow the guidelines established by the classical order of the Greeks had first shaped, Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian. Even though the Romans did copy some of the Greek designs, they also put their own flair on the buildings. when they would do art, they would do art a little bit differently on the outsides of the buildings. They would use more arches. They also developed some different column designs other than just the 3 that the Greeks had. And one of the most important elements that the Romans contributed to architecture was the arch. And you can see that in a lot of the Roman design, the arch plays a big role. And it's also just beautiful construction. I'd also like to focus a little bit on the spread of architecture, because I don't think that it's known very well that at the time that the Greeks and Romans were having all these marvelous architecture feats, the New World was also just as innovative and beautiful as the Roman and Greeks. And in fact, according to legends and chronicles, they focused on building strong foundations, since the soil on their ground was susceptible to sinking due to the warm and often damp climate. The Aztecs used a colorful and easy-to-cut volcanic stone called Tetzaltl to form the base of their construction. And just to me, that is so ingenious that they were able to literally build a floating city. I don't think they get enough credit for that. Temples, tombs, and ball court ruins are still around to this day, so proving that they are just as sturdy and long-lasting as the Roman and Greek buildings. And they were also said to be just as beautiful and magnificent. Going forward to the architecture of the Renaissance, with the beginning of the Renaissance, the buildings started to take on a different artistic flair. Now, we had seen the Gothic and the Greek and Roman styles, but now with the Renaissance, they were caring more about proportion, geometry, and symmetry, just like the art of that day. Domes, niches, and atticulars started to show up on building designs as well. I like how the history of architecture puts, ever since antiquity, architecture, the art of designing and constructing buildings, has always been closely intertwined with the history of art. And I think that it's very clear in the time of the Renaissance that that's true, because everything that they were doing with the art and how they were painting and how the pictures changed, it's the same with buildings. You got much more geometry, you got symmetry on your buildings, and so I think there is a very close link there. In my conclusion, I found that throughout history, mankind has been trying to improve whatever we can. And the same goes for architecture. At every time period, there is an improvement. If it's developing tools or better material or creating columns. It's incredible how we have developed from living in caves to now creating domed arches. And I can't say that I have something that I think is more important than the other, because honestly, I feel without any of them, we would not have the buildings that we have today. Thank you, and have a good day.